when you can create a big win for somebody, that person now just needs the company to do well. Because if their big win is big enough, then we no longer care about, hey, how do I get more money? It's, hey, how do we make this, what's going to be the funnest thing we can do for the company? What's going to be the best experience we can have while we're working here? Because if I've got to be here for 10 years, let's go get it. And if that big win is, right now the big win is for most employees out there, is left up to them. Hey, you got to take your own money and save.
Right.
And
that's a good point, Kevin.
Yeah.
Sound of that tractor means it's time for us to go to work. You're listening to the Give Us the Dirt podcast powered by Hoopah Grading Company. My name is Brandon, and I am your host. Today, we're about to crack open the blueprints on compensation. Our guest has been on a mission to rebuild the way we think about paying people, and if you've ever wondered whether your compensation system is built to last, this episode's for you. Joining us today is Kevin Monaghan, CEO and founder of Intuitive Compensation Group and author of Buckets, a new perspective on employee compensation. Kevin's journey started in some pretty wild places, from working as a production assistant on NBC's The Office to building a financial consulting business in China. Today, he's knocking down outdated compensation models and giving businesses like ours tools to create something better. And when Kevin's not fixing broken pay structures, you can find him fighting moss in his backyard or searching for the world's best blue cheese dressing. I can't wait to find out more about the moss thing. Get ready to pick up some tools from Kevin's toolbox, because we're about to break ground on a better way to think about pay in the construction industry. Welcome to the podcast, Kevin.
Thank you very much.
How'd we do on the intro? Did we screw anything up there?
No, very good. And I think right beforehand I said, did I send you that? It must have been my wife, because if I sent it, I talk about how I fix up old motorcycle, or I call them motorcycles, but they're scooters. And then if my wife sends the introduction, she talks about how I'm always fighting moss in the forest has kind of reclaimed our backyard, so we get so much shade, and moss is just everywhere.
You can't stop the moss.
Yeah, I'd have to cut down the trees to get that.
The moss is going to win every time.
Exactly.
Oh, that's so. And yeah, we totally missed the motorcycle thing. That was our research department missed that one.
That's a new one. I haven't posted that one yet, but that's been a fun trying to find a hobby.
Yeah.
The grass was for about 3 years, but I lost to the moss, so I said I need to do something else, and it was.
So did you grow up riding motorcycles, and now you're just getting back into it, or you just woke up one morning and said, you know what, I need a motorcycle?
I grew up with scooters. So these were, when I was in Los Angeles and working at television shows, you'd spend so much time sitting in traffic out there. But if you had a little scooter, and it was just a 50cc scooter, not only could you save money in Los Angeles, because I got 100 miles per gallon on that thing, but when there was traffic, I could just zip right in between people. So I got used to driving scooters. And then when we went to China, the same thing. Everybody has
scooters in China. I remember seeing that, yeah.
So I came here.
The only people riding scooters here are people with DUIs.
That's what everybody's told me. They go, oh, you got did you get a DUI? Did you get a DWI scooter? And I said, I just liked them.
Yeah.
But I guess that's the image that they give off. So I'm going to have to figure out, get a T-shirt.
So now you've upgraded. Now you're going all in.
Yeah,
on a motorcycle.
Not a motorcycle yet.
Oh,
I'm still going to the 50 cc's. I'm fixing up some originals. And,
that's fun.
And I read the book, The Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. And to be quite honest, it was how to bring things to completion, how to think about things, and it's really helped me in business too, because it's helped me dive into processes, overcome challenges that I don't know how to solve when I initially get there, and get through the frustration of running into something that's hard and giving up.
Yeah, actually taking a project all the way from conception to completion.
Yeah, because you can't run the motorcycle without every piece kind of working.
Yeah.
And then you take those principles into business, and it's like, oh, wait, we can improve these, and it would run more efficiently.
I love it. I love it. Kevin, you've got a pretty interesting background. I think I told you before we hit record here that everybody's been walking around asking me, hey, it's the guy from The Office coming in today. And I said, yeah, he's going to be here. I said, but that's just one of the many things that this guy's known for, but that is a pretty cool piece of your background.
That was one of my favorites. So I had come in out of college. I didn't know what I wanted to do, but I felt the thing was to get a job. Right. So that's okay, I went to college. I got to use this degree.
Right.
So I went into work for some big companies and did not like it. It wasn't my style. It felt like you had to put in a lot of time, and it didn't matter. The results weren't getting you ahead. It was more time and politics that was getting you ahead, and I didn't enjoy that. So because of that, I was in my first performance review at a big corporation, and they told me, oh, well, you need to be here a little bit longer. And I said, but you just told me my numbers were 3 times better than anybody else's. And they said, yeah, but we're going to promote some other people rather than you. And I quit right then and there. Mm-hmm. So I wasn't planning on quitting that day. And wound up, I was like, what am I going to do now? I've got to do something. I was going to drive to Chicago, and I could trade complex options. So my plan was to stand outside they call it the SIBO. I think it's the Chicago Board of Options and Exchange. And I was just going to hold a sign up going, give me a chance, I'll do anything. And living in my car in Chicago didn't seem like a good idea because I wasn't planned out. So I took a phone call from on the way to Chicago from my friend, and he said, listen, why don't you come out to California? You've always wanted to do something in comedy. You can stay with me for a little bit, and you can work on a show and try to get a job on a show. And so that felt like a better idea than sleeping in my car with no plan. And so I went out there, started trying to apply for jobs, got a job on America's Funniest Home Videos. And even then, this was 20 years ago, but even then, it was still the digital age was coming up. So, people don't think it exists, but that show is still
So
collecting.
What was the gig?
It was watching the submissions. Most of it was watching the submissions, filtering it through, and
picking which ones made the show.
Not which ones made the show, but picking the ones that were relevant to give to the writers to pick which ones made the show.
What an awesome job.
It was cool, but it gets draining. It was the people in the room that were also watching.
Yeah.
But I learned this. Everybody thinks that their child is the funniest thing. And so there's a lot of proud parents out there.
That's hilarious. You got every video of their kid's first walk or their first step or that's hilarious.
And so there was a lot to filter through. And then, of course, every 2 weeks we'd then have production. So we would spend 2 days in production shooting 5 or 6 shows at a time, I think it was. And during that time, though, I did not want to stay at that company. I was cold calling a show called The Office. And I was only doing it because my friend who I was staying with made me watch the British version, and I knew they were starting an American version. So kind of famously, it took me 8 months to cold call my way onto that show. Finally, when I called, one of the production assistants had to go to a funeral that day. So I was lucky. I had built a relationship. I knew everybody at that show because I called them all the time. Hey, it's Kevin here. I want to make sure my resume is on the top of the pile. So they knew me, and they go, you know what? Somebody just told us they had to go home for a funeral. We need somebody to fill in for 2 days. Can you do it? Now, I didn't realize I was doing this at the time, but I said, let me check. And I hung up, and I said, what am I doing? I said, I'll do it. And so I got the chance to go for it. It was the episode I was on was called Dwight's Speech. So it was in season 1. And believe it or not, that day he actually had the flu. So there was a lot of chaos happening because they had to cancel production, which is a big deal. There's so many moving pieces to it. There's so many people there. You have to rent the space, everything else. So there's insurance claims and everything else. And so anything they needed, I would run to get it done. And I just did it with a smile on my face. And for 2 days, I was what can I help with? What can I help with? And that attitude got, as they got picked up for season 2, they needed to hire more people. I got picked up for the show. And it was not easy because it was a very popular show. I remember the producer coming out and saying and telling me, he said, how did you get this job? Because every time we have an opening, it's, Steve Carell's cousin or the president of NBC wants to get their son on the show. So it was not an easy gig to get, but sometimes persistence and a positive attitude can pay off, and I got lucky.
So you were writing?
I wanted to be a writer. I started as a production assistant.
Yeah.
I moved my way into the writer's room as the writer's assistant, or assistant to the writers if you're a fan of the show. And I was in the room, but I was not a writer.
What a cool experience.
It was.
I love that. And I love how you got it too. And I'm glad you brought that up, that you, Kevin, I mean, just knowing that little bit about you, you're a dreamer. Right? But you're also a waymaker. And the mindset of, hey, you can't do that, or that's not possible. You're going to find a way to do it. And I love that you mentioned it took you 8 months of cold calling to finally get someone to answer the phone and give you a chance.
I wish I tracked how many calls it was, but it was at least every 2 weeks. I'd fax over my resume. Sometimes I'd just draw a cool little smiley face and send the fax and just say, hey, that's put my resume on top of the pile. Just make sure it's there in case you ever need anything.
Think about how many people stop after that first call.
Right. Yep.
That's great. That's great. And then you said from there you spent some time in China. How did you transition to that, and what did that time look like?
So after 5 years on The Office, 5 seasons on The Office, I realized that I wasn't going to become a writer if I stayed at that show. And I had a big challenge, which was comedy television was being replaced by reality TV. It was the same results for a third of the production cost. So the executives loved it. Talk about incentives to hit your bonuses. And so, all of a sudden, we were making new comedies. If you remember growing up, every network was picking up 3 or 4 new comedies every season.
Yep.
And that created an incredible amount of jobs and opportunities for writers. Well, when reality came out, every network went up from picking 2 or 3 shows to none. And I could see that this was an industry that was going to go through a downturn. And so I took one more shot. I left with some of the writers who were starting a show called Parks and Recreation. So I went over there hoping that they'd get picked up and there'd be an opportunity to grab a writer's spot. But there were so many out-of-work writers that, I was getting replaced by people who were writing for years on shows like The Simpsons. And I just went, this is going to take a decade, and I don't know if I have a decade to kind of rive this type of wave. I think I'm better off trying to find another industry. And if I'm going to leave my dream job, then I got to do something extraordinary or I'm going to regret it. So I moved to Shanghai, China, and picked up a job there.
I've got to do something extreme. I'm packing a bag and I'm moving to China.
Yep.
Was that the extent of the plan?
One person there. That was it. Somebody said, "I'll give you a job. It's commission only." So the barrier to entry was, we'll give anybody a shot, and that's all I really wanted, was just a shot. And so we went over there, and it was a consulting firm that helped international people with taxes. And they said, "Kevin, with your attitude, there's not a lot of talent over here doing this. If you came, I bet you'd do very well." That was the premise.
That's great.
And so I up and left, and I was glad I did, because I think if I went and worked at a company at the time, I think I would have been thinking, I should have stayed in television. But because I immersed myself in something new, I was able to avoid that.
Another great experience. How long were you in China?
6 years.
6 years. I've been to China a couple different times, and I don't know if you had this experience, but people looked at me like I was from outer space.
What years were you there?
It was, this was probably early 2000s.
Yep, that would be right, because they weren't, and it depended on where you went. The city might have seen more, but I remember.
We were in one of the more rural areas of 10 million people. I think it was Chengdu. Was where we went, and then the second time went back to Qingdao, which was a little bit more. There was a little bit more of a city feel than Chengdu. It felt a little bit more rural there. But I remember being there and people just staring at me. They literally would come up to me, Kevin, and hand me their babies, and step back and take a picture.
Yep,
like I was a freak.
Yeah. So somewhere in the early 2000s is when they really were coming out of. I guess it was the communist era, or whatever that era was called. And I remember, because when I went over there to interview, I remember, being lost and trying to communicate with our translator where, I was looking for something. I was within 2 or 3 blocks. And what dawned on me was these people that we were asking for directions, you could see on the blocks that they had police stations at the end of every block. And what I didn't realize when I was frustrated going, how come nobody knows where this is? I'm within 2 or 3 blocks of this place, was that the communist regime was so controlling. Many of those people never left their block.
Right.
So they didn't know that there was a tourist destination 2 blocks down the road because that just wasn't
Their world was that block.
Right.
Yeah.
So that was that was a big, an eye-opening experience. But then from the 2000s to when I was there in 2000, I mean, it went from, farmland and rundown houses to metropolis that just, put most cities to shame.
Yeah.
I mean, I was in Shanghai, and that city just went from farmland to, I went back. I took my assistant to New York City, and he said, "This is New York City. This is America." I was like, "It was built in the 1930s. The subway's old, and he's used to getting on a subway. It's hot. It can travel to Boston in 20 minutes from New York City, and he's just like, this is America." I was like,
yeah.
So it was. I mean, they grew fast.
Kevin, you've got this melting pot of experiences, and somehow you take your experience there in Hollywood and with the entertainment scene, your experience consulting in China and all that, and it goes into this blender, and from that you come up with this revelation or model for compensation. How did that evolve out of the experiences that you've had up to this point? Did the book come first?
No, the experience came first. Excuse me. The experience came first. So what happened in China was I was two passive owners of a company had said, "Hey, listen, if you help us grow this," because they had a key person, they had lost some people, so they had just had some big turnover. They said, "Hey, listen, we made some mistakes in keeping people. If you help us rebuild this, we're going to do things like give you equity and we'll do a profit sharing plan." And so we had those things in place. And my life was 6 years. We had built it from a startup to I was running 44 people. It was a good business, and I didn't know it at the time, but what I know now is that the data says that these types of things can do a lot of harm, these types of incentive plans. And I was oblivious to it, but I had spent 6 years working really hard, weekends, nights, long hours. And I built up quite a life around it. And what the data said would happen wound up happening to us. And so as we grew, the equities, we started having equity fights. We started having profit sharing fights. And what wound up happening was these incentive programs, they took our friendships and they took our vision for the company, and they started mixing business decisions with money in people's pockets. And that created a different dynamic. Leading it, I saw the management team and I saw these tools take the vision from what's in it for the customer to what's in it for me. And so I lost those decisions. We were looking at an 8-figure sale, and those programs wound up causing so many problems. We had an exodus of people because the profit sharing didn't pay out after we had our best year, because the business had to reinvest in the profits to look bigger because they were trying to sell. Mm-hmm. But everybody else went, "You just screwed me over." And so we had kind of an exodus, and we went from an 8-figure sale to I think it was a 6-figure fire sale where key people got nothing.
Wow.
And so that experience, when I left, it caused me business divorce, personal divorce. And when I came back to the States, I started sharing my story, and I realized that a lot of other people were saying that they had this problem. And so as I was thinking of what to do next in life, I kind of said, well, if so many people have this, how can we solve it? And so that's when I started meeting with people. I started the idea of coming up with a company that solves this. And we looked far and wide for solutions, and it was complex. It was different. It was a lot of just breaking how we normally think about pay and compensation. And a lot of it reflected the fact that we got so smart that we think our intentions are to do the right things, but we actually cause a lot of problems. And so we have a second book coming out now on, but the first book was all about just how to get it right with the upper levels of management, with key players, between key players and business owners. Because a lot of times the key player would have, they'd be responsible for bringing in all this money, and the business owner gets there to say, hey, we've got all the glory here. And it was the people doing the work. And so that story and then the experiences helped us kind of craft our philosophy on compensation, which is very different than what I would say how most of us think about pay.
It's very different. And I had the chance to talk to you a couple weeks ago, and as you were speaking about this, it just reminded, this is an issue that we all face.
Yep.
Every business owner is facing this at some level. But I would say that in the construction industry, it's probably a little bit harder issue with us right now, because I think, and I say that because our turnover rate in the industry is significantly higher than most other industries. I don't know why. I think there's a misconception that, hey, that's just the way it is, right? And people leave for more money. We trade people back and forth. They're looking for, a quarter more an hour, 50 cents, $1 more an hour, and they'll leave for that. It's just how it is. So we've got that issue, but I love the fact that you used your personal experience to come in to address a problem and say, how do we fix this? How do we press into this and find a solution? And that's when we're going to ask you to give us the dirt. So our listeners on this podcast are construction people. Yep. We do have, I believe I saw the other day, we have 0.01% of the Chinese population listening to the podcast too. So there are listeners over there, maybe people you've run into during your time. Yeah, we do have a little bit of a fan base over there in China as well. But explain just at the basic level what a compensation strategy is. Because for most of us in our industry, it's as easy as pay, right? We just think it's what we pay you.
Let me give a historical story example of how I think about the compensation strategy and where I think the disconnect is. And I'll use in the United States for our armed forces. This is going to be from the 1800s. So we didn't have airplanes back then. We didn't have the Marines. We just had an Army and a Navy. And the government came in and they looked at pay in two different lights. For the Army, they said, okay, if you serve in the Army, we're going to pay you. And if you serve X amount of years, then your military pay will continue. This was very much set up under the same strategy as the Roman Empire, who was credited for creating the first pension type environment. And they said, okay, for the Navy, what we're going to do is we're going to put an incentive system in place. So the government was going to fund it through the general expenses of the government, and they were going to take care of the people that way. And for the Navy, they said, okay, well, for the Navy, what we'll do is we'll give them an incentive where we want them to go out and we want them to enforce, like take down the pirates and keep our merchant ships safe. And if they come back and they've saved, stolen from the pirates or, taken away illegal trade ships, merchandise, then they'll get incentivized, and they would, when they got to the dock, they would get like 10% of the value for the crew. And what was interesting was, the intention was good, but what wound up happening was our Army became a unit that worked very well together and was very productive at the wars during the time. But the Navy, through the incentive system, became known as privateers, or what they said was it was basically a term that meant pirates with a government license to go do that work. And it's a reflection of pay and compensation strategy, because in today's world, most people are acting like the Navy. And most people are trying to say, hey, if this happens, then you get this. And the same type of philosophy is then everybody puts their blinders on and focuses on themselves. So when you're focused on yourself, then, and it's all about today's dollars, then your employees will jump at $1 more down the road because, well, you train them to think that way. where the Army said, hey, listen, we're going to be in this for the long term. We want everybody to live, and we want everybody to have, a happy life, later in life. I refer to it as a form of delayed gratification. But they all had a sense that they were in it together. They all had a sense that they needed to perform the activities that needed to be done for that job, and that they would be taken care of. And we don't think like that today. Most of our leaders, and I can't tell how old you are, but I'm 45, and I would say most of our leaders came from a generation where their parents were the traditionalists who lived through the Great Depression. They had pension systems in there. And most leaders today are very, because of that, bottom line, practical, and we've done things like create incentive systems around that type of philosophy, which is, hey, the results have to be here and then you get something. The problem with that is, just like the Navy, it creates a self-view. And the hard part is we have outregulated the things that it would take to help employees for the longer term have a sense of, hey, this is going to pay off for everybody. We're being treated equally, and we're not influenced by the short-term decisions, so we can make the decisions that are best for the customer and the company. We don't have to have blinders on and focus on ourselves. And that would be how I would describe the difference in compensation strategy. Is most people think like the Navy. How can we lower our costs? How can we create an incentive system to motivate the right behaviors?
Yeah. Kevin, that is so insightful. And as you were talking, I think about it, and you're going to see me pull this back to the construction industry throughout this podcast. But I think about our industry. We have been notorious for saying, all right, project manager, if you save money off that budget, we'll give you a piece of that.
Right.
All right, estimator, pre-construction, if you're able to get more profit into that bid, then we'll give you a piece of that. We don't do that here, but I've seen strategies where that's taken place, and it causes this selfish mindset, right? It's a focus on the individual instead of the team performance.
Right.
And so to your point, don't be surprised when that person is influenced by self-gain.
Correct.
Somewhere else. You've created it. You've kind of poured gasoline on that fire a little bit and created that mindset yourself through your incentives.
You're encouraging them to act on, the next dollar. And
so your approach to it and the Army's approach to it seems like it's more focused on fairness and transparency.
Fairness and transparency are big, particularly with younger generations. I would say more so is the compensation strategies don't do this today. They don't begin with the end in mind.
What do you mean by that?
So let me go back to the story of the Army and the Navy. If we're looking at the Army's philosophy was, let's begin with the end in mind. If you serve here, you will be taken care of. Believe it or not, most employees crave safety and security. What they don't like is the burden of control to, hey, I have to do these certain actions in order to get certain results. That's stressful for somebody. And then it focuses them on themselves. So by beginning with the end in mind, it allows people to connect to a story. And it allows people to make decisions for the company today because they know that they're going to be okay as long as the company is doing the best things for the company. Does that make sense?
It makes sense, yeah. But that's an education, and that's a trust that you've got to establish with your team that, hey, you know what, when the company performs well, that's going to translate into prosperity for everyone that's involved, for every team member.
There's a line there that's hard to distinguish. So the first thing that a compensation plan should do is focus on the safety and security of something that the employee finds important of where they're going.
All right, say that again, because I was about to ask you that. What is the first step you would tell someone that says, all right, I'm going to take a look at my strategy? You said the safety and security of
what's in it for them, the WIFM. Right?
WIFM.
If somebody, let's just say you're recruiting young people into the company. believe it or not, I'm going to go to Gen Z. Believe it or not, Gen Z wants to work for one company, which is a strange way to answer or think of, because the average tenure is 2 years.
Right.
And when you talk to young people, they say, give me a reason to stay 5 or 6 years, because I know that if I stay here, I'll get a 3 or 4% raise here. Maybe I get promoted, but I'm playing this political game, which isn't fun to play. But very often I can jump ship and go to somebody else who will pay me more. But if you give me a reason to stay, and oftentimes our compensation strategy doesn't address that. It doesn't have something that's like a clear, hey, if this is what you're going to get for being here.
You're right. You're right. And that's true in our industry too. You know, a typical compensation model is a salary or an hourly rate and possibly a bonus, an annual bonus, or an end of the year bonus based off of some kind of metrics that you've got in place. The only exceptions to that, you've got some companies that are ESOPs where, there is a long-term look at a payoff down the road. But I would say for the majority, it's pay, it's salary, hourly rate, and bonus.
So the strategy that we use when it comes to, my specialty is with key people, but this applies to everybody. The strategy is to have and be able to communicate what I call a big win. The more safe that big win is, the more secure that big win is, the better. If I'm looking at a time frame for a big win to manage expectations on a leader's, 65 doesn't work. Particularly, really, in order for delayed gratification, which is what a big win is, it's essentially instilling, I'll call it and refer to it as a big win, delayed gratification, or retention compensation. However, if I use those terms, I'm meaning the same thing. But in order to instill that in your compensation strategy, really, that big win should be concentrated between 5 and 15 years down the road. Anything shorter, and the brain's going to treat it like an incentive. Anything longer, and it's like, oh my gosh, my life is
never
going to
happen. Right.
Now, they may choose to, somebody who's there for 15 years may choose to continue to stay, but to sign on for 30 years at a company is rare. It doesn't exist except with very minute personality who will commit to that. They want to continue to be validated along the way. But when you can create a big win for somebody, that person now just needs the company to do well. Because if their big win is big enough, then we no longer care about, hey, how do I get more money? It's, hey, how do we make this, what's going to be the funnest thing we can do for the company? What's going to be the best experience we can have while we're working here? Because if I've got to be here for 10 years, let's go get it. And if that big win is, right now the big win is for most employees out there, is left up to them. Hey, you got to take your own money and save.
Right.
And
that's a good point, Kevin.
Yeah.
No, you're so right. As you're saying this, it's like it's so clear. That's what we've been doing. And I don't say we as a company. I mean we as an industry.
Right.
We have,
and it's not just your industry.
Promoted this through short-term solutions to this compensation problem that we have, and we've created this mindset of incentives, even with our bonuses. So if I'm listening to you correctly, a bonus, an end of the year bonus, which has been a traditional compensation strategy for construction, it's an incentive,
right?
And it's forgotten about as quickly as you give it to them, and then it becomes, all right, what's next?
Yeah.
What do you give me next?
A bonus is very stressful for employees. Once you pay it, it's expected. I mean, you might as well put your bonus plan in the category of pay. It has the same psychological and dopamine hit as, a drug, which is, okay, thank you for giving to me this. Well, the next one needs to be bigger and come sooner. And oftentimes I say it's usually squandered, which means even if you do pay it, you would hope that the employee would save it, maybe use it to have some, enjoyment and take a vacation with the excess money. But oftentimes we see people taking their bonuses and committing to buying a new car, and now they're committed to a new payment.
Right.
And now they're even more stressed. And guess who they have to come to solve the money problem? They have to come back to their leaders.
Wow. What a great analogy of your bonus compared to that of just a huge dopamine hit.
Yeah.
It is, right? It's temporary and it's gone. And so often owners of companies get frustrated, think, well, you've forgotten what I did for you, right? You forgot what, now it's right back to what's next.
Right. And if you want to get into the dirt of
look at, I see what you did there. I see what you did.
What you want to do by creating a big win is you want to hit a completely different level of motivation. Most people think that money and reason work. But this is my argument is you're only pandering to 5% of a person's brain if you're trying to convince them to do something with money. This is not the right way to influence or persuade behavior. The hardest part is it's delayed gratification that hits a person's true motivators. So I know your listeners, I watch some podcasts, they're into traction, they're into the institutions they would swear by, Drive, Good to Great by Jim Collins. These are staples in their leadership thought processes. So the first thing that psychologically, that traction or EOS, which I think a lot of your listeners were talking about,
right?
The first thing they make you do is put out a vision. And you have to put out a long-term vision. And they go out to 5 to 10 years. Some organizations call it a BHAG, whatever that may be. Why? Because that's where the subconscious brain, which is what which is where you want your compensation to be, doesn't have the concept of time. So what it can do is it can go into the future and it can pull forward how it feels about the future and act as if today happened. Let me give you an example. So we're getting into the dirt now. This is stuff that's going to seem crazy to a lot of leaders, but this is the type of frame breaking that's needed if people are going to fix their compensation strategies. Go. So when you take a look at I have a friend who's in the New York State pension system. Now, this is somebody who has a computer science graduate degree. They get constant job offers for 6 figures, and they're working as a teacher for the Department of Education because they have a pension. So I noticed on Facebook one day she posted, only 15 years left until my retirement. So this is somebody where the average job seeker stays 2.5 years, and she's turning down other jobs and declaring she's going to be there for another 15 years. So why is this important to understand? Because that's a big win. And that's a big win it's a lifestyle choice. And I'm not saying that private companies are comparable to a public school system. They don't do a great job of getting the wrong people off the bus. But if you think about it, what she's doing is she's going into the future and knowing that there's safety and security there. Remember, the brain prizes safety and security. So she knows, hey, it's government backed, it's going to be there, and when I'm done, my income's going to come in and I don't have to work. Her brain is able to go into the future, see that there's a big win out there, and act like that big win already happened. Because the brain doesn't need for it to be real, it just needs to believe, to influence. And by creating this type of thing in your compensation plan, and I know people aren't going to run out and go to pensions, but by creating some type of story or a big win that's there, backed with money and safe, the more safe and secure it is, the more motivational it can be. That's retention, but that's also motivation. That person will move mountains to get their big win.
This is fascinating. And what you're talking about, the psychology of the team member, right? How do you get them to understand, by looking at the big picture, you're capturing their heart, you're capturing their motivation, their inspiration to give you everything that they have, versus incentivizing them to give you what matters to them in that moment. And it's absolutely fascinating. So You gave us an example there. You mentioned a pension, and I know people are familiar with that, although you don't see it much anymore. When I worked with Martin Marietta, and I still think Martin Marietta is doing it to this day, there's a pension program, and they were one of the few companies that still offered that. And after 20 years of working at Martin Marietta, I left to come here. But Martin Marietta said, "Hey, when you retire, this is something that you're going to get."
Yeah.
And I remember thinking, I didn't put a dime into that.
Yeah.
And so it was a big win that really at the time, I was so young when I started, I didn't care about a pension. It was too far out, right? 65 was too far out for me to care about, to your point. But give us an example in our world, in the construction space, knowing that our compensation strategy looks primarily like a salary or an hourly rate with a bonus.
Right.
What is something, just one small thing that we could do? And I know that's asking a lot because you've got so many. This is big, right? But give us, what is one small thing that we could do to adapt that strategy to create a big win?
Right. So let's look at some current companies out there that are creating big wins. So you mentioned before, some companies are going the ESOP route. So what's nice about the ESOP route is it allows a company to say, hey, if you come in here, you're going to be building value. You're going to have this. It's going to be a lump sum payment when you leave, and there's some benefits in being able to recruit and retain people who can see, hey, that they were right. I came in. They said I was going to get some ownership. I get a statement with a value on it. I can see that going up. There's safety and security because there's liability studies that have to be done on that each year. So that would be an example of, so their ESOPs are creating big wins.
So you're a fan?
I'm a fan of some of it. Where I wouldn't be a fan is the mechanisms that they're using to stabilize the big win. In other words, a lot of them are, there's a lot of risk on the company, where if the company goes out, their people's big wins can go away. And you have to remember, if we're kind of getting into the dirt, the subconscious mind, rule number one, there's no time. So by having a big win, even if it's in the future, the more safe and secure it is, which is the language that their subconscious mind speaks, the better.
Yep.
So my argument would be that the liability fund can use certain mechanisms to safely secure those things for the employees, but they often don't. A lot of them take risk with that money. And I would argue that that's why the 401k is failing so many people today.
That security piece is
because markets, the subconscious mind, number three, there's no negatives. So if the value goes down, it's very detrimental to it shuts down the motivator, the long-term motivators, and kicks it back to the conscious mind. And the conscious mind needs to be validated. It's needy. So you would want to not have that, risk it, or not trigger it. So I'm a fan of ESOPs because they allow you to create a big win. They allow you to communicate a big win. The more safe and secure you can make the mechanism inside of it that protects the employee, the better. Let's think of another example here.
John, out on the construction crew. Yep. He's making a healthy salary. He gets a year-end bonus, but there's no big win for him right now. What do I do? John's a high performer. He's someone I need to keep. I would like to keep. I want him thinking he's going to retire here. What's one thing I could do to adjust his compensation plan?
So if John is a key player in an industry, there are things in the tax code and Department of Labor that they've created what's known as discriminatory compensation, meaning there are key players where, hey, you can put together packages for just them that they're complex, but they're allowed to, companies are encouraged to use them in the tax code because they know that if a key player leaves, it can risk jobs, it can risk other people. So inside of our tax code, there are things that you can do to discriminate and do something for a key player and design packages for them. But I will tell you this, they're incredibly complex. And the reason they're complex is because when the government put them in place, no politician can go, hey, look what we did for the top people at your company. Mm-hmm. It doesn't send a good message. So they buried it in complexity to get it through. And that's the downside, is that it's hard to navigate those, and more people should use them. I saw a statistic that outside of the Fortune 1,000 companies, only 17% use them. But it's very industry specific or geographic specific where people are even aware of it. So I'll give you an example. If I'm up in the Philadelphia to Boston corridor, I'm the third or fourth person in the door talking about these concepts. If I'm in Charlotte, North Carolina, this is often the first time they've heard of these things.
Sure.
So it's an educational problem, and like credit unions found these things a long time ago, and something like 44% of the credit unions are using these today. And I'd argue a lot of private companies should be, but it's burdensome to learn. There's an educational.
So is that, with your group, with Intuitive Compensation Group, is that what you come in to a company and help them design?
Correct.
Okay.
We help them navigate and understand. I say there's approximately, and you can stretch it by counting. Hey, you can create a trust that can do this or this. So there might be a few more, but I say there's 17 options that a company can use to create a big win. But it does have to follow. I say it's discriminatory compensation. You do have to qualify usually to be able to count that person as a key player.
Okay.
Usually in my line of work, these people are they're looking for their own personalized kind of big win, a reason to stay, if you will. It's very harder for a lot of the other people on the ground because you can't put those types of packages together for everyday employees. You have to do something that's more broadly applicable, and it's hard to appease the masses.
Yeah.
It really is.
That's interesting. So, yeah, that's, and that makes a lot of sense for your key players to be able to come in and do that. And it sounds like there's a fair amount of customization that can accompany something like that too. You've got 17 different options, and you're able to walk in and say what fits for this company may not be the same solution for this one.
Right.
Yeah. And I did. Yeah, that was kind of a loaded question I gave you because you're right. So much of our turnover issues and our retention problems are out in the field.
Yeah.
And so that's a different strategy, and it's a little bit harder to address that, which is why we do see some companies going the ESOP route, and we see some other strategies being implemented. I even thought about, too, as you were talking about the incentive-based mindset surrounding a bonus, it's almost as if you'd be better off creating a big win by giving them some bonus right then to be able to use, give them that dopamine hit, but then also setting some aside and saying, hey, this part over here, we're gonna put away for you. It's gonna grow. It's gonna continue to build.
Yep.
Is that
that's the hard part of what. So what you're saying is absolutely true. We're in this crazy environment where today's, in general, people. I know our savings rate is great, but it's really the top of the curve that's pushing that up. The vast majority of, let's say, the bottom 80% of the population really doesn't have the money to save, doesn't have the discipline to save because one expense can come along and then it's, I need that money. The employers don't want to save for them. It's not our responsibility. We've gotten our programs we've been trained to believe that you're on your own now. There's no more kind of like the Army and the Navy. There's no more togetherness here. It's
right.
Well, you have to save for yourself. It's not my responsibility. So you have employees that don't want to save or can't save. You have employers that don't want the burden of saving for their people. And the big elephant in the room is when you survey it, the number one thing employees are looking for is the employer to solve that. And here's what makes it so hard. Delayed gratification. To use your words, we're going to save this for you. It's going to grow. It's going to be good for you down the road. Delayed gratification is an unwelcomed guest. People would rather have a bird in the hand today than two in the bush tomorrow. Mm-hmm. So it's incredibly nuanced to be able to, in mind, we have to isolate the key players, and we can do that by extracting their story. And then we have to hone in and create something around that story. But you can't do that for 13,000 employees,
right.
if you will.
Right.
So to try to get it into the masses is very difficult.
Wow. Okay. All right. I was hoping you were going to give me the secret solution
let me
to
give
it.
you some other. We talked about ESOP being one. Let me give you some others that people are doing. So Vanguard says, hey, look, people can't save on their own. What we'll do is they contribute 10 to 15% of your 401k for you.
Okay.
Just by doing that, and remember,
regardless of if you put a dime in or not,
correct,
there's 10
correct.
to 15% going in.
Yep, we're going to save for you is the mantra that they went with. Now, the positive is that what people are looking for. The negative, those vehicles are at 30 years in the future.
Too far.
It's too far in the future. But what it did for them is they have a lot of turnover because it's most of their jobs are call center jobs. What that did, though, is it moved the average to like 5.5 when the nation's average is 2.2. Progressive Insurance, they have a program called gain sharing, where it's really a structured bonus. But what it's done is a third of their 50,000 employees have been there 10 years or more. So the big win was just through a consistent bonus where you had a secure bonus down here and you could get more. I've called their employees and interviewed. They really don't understand it, but they like that the bonus can be pretty big. So even for some, like once you're in above entry level, it's like 8 to 20% of a person's salary per year. And if I was to just kind of give your guidance of all the big wins I've seen, it tends to fall between 2 and 10% to create a big win, as if you're looking at it as an expense. My argument would be, it's not an expense. It should be an investment, and you really need the company's circumstances to show the ROI on it. And what it really does is it helps management find and keep the right people so that they can offboard the wrong people.
Right.
And when you get that, you can really start making money.
And it's at the same time you put the focus on the team and the performance of the team instead of the individual.
Correct.
Yeah. That's great. Kevin, it's complicated, which is why you have a job, right? That's why it is what a great space to press into, because this is a major issue, especially for our industry. And if you've listened to the podcast, which it sounded like you had, thank you, by the way, you hear that people are constantly trying to address the people issue that we have, and the compensation strategy is a huge part of that. I think you have given us a lot to think about here, and, trying to, as a company, we've got to be able to answer that question. We've got to be able to give the employee a reason to stay.
Yep.
They're asking for it. They want a reason to stay, but the things that we're doing may not be causing them to stay. It may just be causing them to think about, all right, what's next? Yeah. What are you going to,
Yeah. Where's my next opportunity? And if things start getting tough here, then it really makes sense. You're training them to jump ship at a more safe and secure opportunity. Wow.
If you had to give one piece of advice to a construction leader who wants to revamp their pay system or their compensation strategy, what would you say? What would be the place to start?
So I'm going to use EOS language, or Entrepreneurial Operating System, which says in your meetings with your key leaders, create an IDS, an issue, discussion, and solution. And the question you should pose to your leaders is, what's the big win we're communicating for working with our company? So if we're recruiting people for 10 years, what's their WIFM? And if you ask that question to your leaders, it gets them to start thinking about what could be possible inside of your company. But it starts the thinking and the process of, okay, how do we create a big win that we can communicate, that we can get behind? What does that look like?
That's a great place to start. Thank you. I'm glad that's something that everybody can do. Everyone that's listening to this can pull together the brain trust and say, all right, what is the big win that we're trying to create for our employees that's 5 to 10 years down the road? And how do we build that into our recruiting message?
That'll get it started.
And then beyond that, how do they get in touch with you? How does someone talk to you or bring you in to look at helping them with their compensation strategies?
The easiest way is to our website. You can check us out, is intuitivecompensation.com.
Kevin, that's awesome. Thank you so much for being with us. We'll put the link into the post here. And I could have done this with you for another 3 hours. I don't think you could have done it with me, but it's fascinating because you're talking about the psychology of of your team and understanding what motivates people, what drives people to success. And we miss that boat so often. So I appreciate your wisdom and the fact that you've used an incredible experience to help us address a major issue that we're dealing with in the industry. So thank you so much for coming and being on the podcast.
Pleasure.
If you like listening to the Give Us a Dirt podcast, we want you to hit the like button and subscribe for more great content.